time for Football at 4. It's powered by the Inside the Birds podcast. It's brought to you by Bet365. Wherever the sport, wherever the moment, it's never ordinary. At Bet365, well, the Phils go down today at the watch party here at Urie's, but we're starting to fill up. People can watch the second game of the doubleheader. Man, they had 2-1. They called Marsh safe on that play, PG.
Yeah,
they called him safe. They bailed him out.
Yeah.
Then Turner stole second, and they had second and third with 2 outs in the bottom of the ninth, and Kyle Schwarber came to the plate, and he struck out.
On 101, by the way.
101 up at his face, and yet Bryce Harper on deck. So this is one of those first situations where we see a spot where you had a pitch to Schwarber because Harper was on deck. You know, you said Robert Suarez was the pitcher. Mm-hmm. He was the one that Harper hit the home run off of the Bedlam to the bank. Right. Yes, and he's waiting on deck. So you know Suarez is trying to go after Schwarber, and Schwarber can't get the job done. He strikes out and ends the game. The Phillies lose 6-4 in game one of the doubleheader. But really, this game was lost early in the game with all the walks from Mick Abel. And
it was a good rally, though, for the boys. And
yeah, well,
the night.
Do you know it's the same day as the Phillies game that ended at 4:41 in the morning?
I did see that on social.
Is that today or was that yesterday?
No, it's today. Yeah.
It was against the Padres, a doubleheader.
Yep.
So they're playing the Padres in another doubleheader today. We're at Urie's Waterfront Restaurant in Wildwood. Little Football at 4. Bring in Geoff Mosher. We'll talk some football right now on the Sports Bash Live 97.3 ESPN. We had a good football conversation yesterday with Adam Kaplan. We were talking about the trades that are going on, the Pittsburgh Steelers making all sorts of trades. We also got into this collusion thing. I don't know if you heard the podcast, Jeff, with Pablo Torre and Mike Florio. You know, we were talking about guaranteed contracts in the NFL and whether we'll ever see that end up happening. But the whole thing about collusion, people keep asking me, how come this hasn't been talked about more? Usually when something of this magnitude would come out, I would think the NFL, if there was a collusion thing, which is they're suggesting it is, they're probably also saying, don't talk about it, right? This is probably something that they don't want to kind of get into all that much. Because I don't quite frankly think the fans care all that much. I think they're on the side of the colluding.
I think the fans don't understand everything that went into it, why it went into it, and I think if you're looking for somewhat of a secondary culprit in this, just based on what I know and have read, is that the NFLPA, who would want to represent the players in this situation, didn't seem to have an open gripe about it, which was surprising to me. I mean, when this happens in baseball, or when there's even the thought of collusion in baseball, the MLBPA is the loudest voice in the room, pointing to the owners. Every labor dispute, constantly talking about the owners don't open the books, they're secretive, you can't trust them. You would think the NFLPA would be making a really big, loud stink about it too, based on the Lamar Jackson situation and the text messages, but they didn't. I'm surprised about that. And I think the lack of sort of accusatory finger from the NFLPA, which has the right to be the loudest voice here, probably is why it's been tamed so far.
Well, I mean, and this is an interesting football conversation. You know, the whole the avenue of the guaranteed contract, the fans are generally against the guaranteed contract because they're saying once you get your money, you have nothing left to play for. So this is why I think that the fans are not outraged by the fact that this was kind of hidden from them, is that, well, we don't care. We don't want guaranteed contracts. So this whole notion of the other sports, you know, you look at baseball, well, you got to pay the guy. You got to pay him the whole contract. It's guaranteed whether he plays or not. That's why I think football has this element, too, of that the fans can, it's more of like if you don't perform, you get cut and you don't get paid.
Well, probably. I think the smart fans, some of them who understand the contracts, and we go through it a lot on Inside the Birds, understand that if every single contract was guaranteed, the way the Eagles operate and do business would be pretty difficult by pushing money that they know will never see the light of day into the back ends of contracts, or when you get a player like Bryce Huff, right, who doesn't live up, and you can eat a certain amount of that dead money. But if all of it was guaranteed, that would be tough to eat because nobody would be taking it on. It would be tough to trade, and you'd have to have them on the team. Tougher to trade, I should say. So, I don't even think most fans understand the complexity of the contracts. I just think that in general, it's hard for fans to side with either millionaires or billionaires. I think they try to stay neutral in it all.
Yeah. Well, and that's the one thing is I do feel, though, there is an element of if you don't perform and you end up getting cut, you can't just do that in the other sports because the element is, hey, I still owe you 5 years, $35 million. You're getting that whether I cut you or not. I can say, hey, I'm cutting you to do something, but there's still the economic. Now, football, some economics with the cap. You do take cap hits and stuff like that. You do get some penalty for giving out bad contracts. You don't just automatically get out of but you get out of paying the guy.
Yeah. And there's also the element of it's sort of easier to default the player than, say, ownership or the owner. So the owner also has a job to do and to perform, right? As far as giving money out, hiring the right people, not just hiring the right people, coaches, but also front office. And if ownership doesn't do their job, there's no money taken away from them. You know what I'm saying? So it's so much easier for fans to just say, well, these players stink, even if they don't, they just weren't in the right fit, or if they were overdrafted by an incompetent scouting staff, which we've seen quite often. But
right.
It's just it never works that way where the common fan will blame the owner as much as the player.
It's funny because I feel like more and more, don't you feel like more and more in sports? Like there was a time, we can go back and kind of revisit. It's funny because the Daryl Morey's kind of going through this right now. Like, what has he ever won? He's made all these mistakes, and, his record would say he's won a lot, but just never won a title. Where Roseman was being, basically people wanted him fired, and people were blaming the Eagles front office. I don't know about ownership so much. Lurie has been able to kind of, not that he deserves criticism, but I'm saying he's never really been looked at as a negative here. But there was a time where people were kind of pressuring, why won't Jeffrey get rid of Howie, right?
No, absolutely. There's no doubt. I do think the GM probably is secondary to the player as far as people who get blamed. But, whereas the owner, you almost have to be like Woody Johnson of the Jets, like bad year after year after year. The Bengals aren't bad year after year, but they're the way they go about business.
Yeah, sell the team.
Yeah, right, exactly. But even then, that's like the last line of defense, right? It's like when you're tired of blaming the players and the front office, then you shift to the owners.
Geoff Mosher, Football at 4 from the Inside the Birds podcast. And, of course, you can check out the podcast on all podcasting platforms as you kind of get through the summer here. We're inside 3 weeks to training camp. We're kind of looking at all the football stories that will matter here. And we talked, we had a question the other day for you in the mailbag that had to do with the NFC and any of the teams there. One of the teams, you mentioned San Francisco. A lot of people keep asking me about the 49ers and whether or not that is a team that had a bad year last year because of injuries, or do we think they're a legit challenger to Philadelphia, Washington, Detroit? Are they on that level yet? Do we think they're back there? I thought that was an interesting team that I thought it was you that brought them up.
I had brought them up as a team that, I think a couple of months ago I was looking at them and saying, I actually predicted their bad season last year. And it happened, and I also felt that they'd be primed for a bounce back this year. They've lost a lot of guys, though. From whether it's Dre Greenlaw or Hufanga. I mean, they've lost. They don't have Deebo Samuel anymore. They lost their left tackle to the Chiefs. Not their starting one; he was starting in place of Trent Williams. But they're a team, Mike, kind of like the Rams 2 years ago, where you bank on their coaching staff, their ability to develop certain players, and the fact that they do have talent. And Christian McCaffrey has been healthy all throughout the offseason, and he's obviously a game-changing type player. Brock Purdy has done well. Last year he did not do well, but when he's been protected and had good weapons around him in that offense, he's done really well. And then on defense, they still have Bosa, they brought in Bryce Huff. They have another guy in the front seven who I'm not thinking of who can rush the passer pretty well. So they're a team that I think you have to reckon with because they're really well coached. And when they're well coached and they're healthy, they can beat anybody.
Then Purdy, by the way, is now kind of established himself as the guy there. We'll see if we'll see what their offense looks differently with the Debo not being there anymore. Ayuk, obviously had the injury, so we'll see how much different their offense is from the one from 2 years ago. Looking at some of the contenders in the NFC, I want to get your thoughts on Green Bay after we saw them in the playoffs. They were the team that everybody loved last year. Is that a team in the NFC that you're looking at as a challenger?
100%. I think Green Bay is really good. I mentioned the Rams. You asked me, I think on Monday, who's the biggest threat to the Eagles in the NFC? And we talked about the Rams and we talked about the Lions, right? But I have no issue saying the Packers could very easily elbow their way into that group and even ahead of that group. They got some speed at receiver with Golden, right, out of Texas. They've got to get a little bit more from their front four rush. But in general, they had a good defense last year. And if the quarterback plays 20% better than he did last year, he's that good. If he plays 20% better, then I think that they're a really tough team.
It's funny because last year, wasn't he the guy that everybody thought was going to take that next jump? Did he not take the jump we thought?
Well, I think he's sort of a victim of his own success in that he's so talented and has such a big arm. And we saw it in the Eagles games. Sometimes he takes a few too many risks. Yeah. And he'll have a couple of turnovers or erratic throws that are and just maybe 4 or 5, but sometimes they mean the difference in the close games. They only lost 5 games right last year. I'd have to go back and check and see how many of them were one possession games or were really close in the end. But that's what I'm saying. Like sometimes all it is that. And that's why I say all he has to do is be, say, 20% better. And I think he'd be pretty good. They lost to the Eagles by what? 5 points. So that was a 1-possession game. And they lost to the Vikings by 2. I'm looking now. Lost to the Lions by 10. So that was only 2%. But then they lost to the Lions by 3. So, look at all their lost to the Vikings by 2. Bears 2. So, and then the Eagles, obviously, they lost 2 in the playoffs. But, 5 of their 6 or 7 losses were by 5 points or less. That to me, it means they're a pretty formidable team if they just make a little bit more improvement.
All right, we're looking at NFC contenders. Geoff Mosher, Football at 4 today. Who are the contenders to Philadelphia? We talk, I think everybody kind of puts Detroit in there. We've talked about them before, but these other teams now, these are like that next tier of team. I want to get your thoughts on Washington then, because not Washington, Minnesota. You just brought them up. They were 13-3 last year. They lost the quarterback. People didn't believe in them last year, but should we believe in them more this year?
Well, that's another team that I'm going to say that when you have a certain level of confidence in the coaching staff, some of the changes don't matter. And after last year and what happened with Sam Darnold, I think you should have a lot of confidence in Kevin O'Connell. He's done a really nice job there. And then not just KOC, but obviously Brian Flores has transformed that defense since he got there. And they have a lot of talent. They signed Javon Hargrave, who did not have a great year with San Francisco, but now you're putting him next to Jonathan Gennard and you're putting him with, Jonathan Allen from the Commanders, who's still a good player. And they've got Van Ginkel there. They've got Isaiah Rodgers. They made smart moves to improve what was already a pretty good defense. Their secondary could get a little better. We'll see. But again, when you have when you do things that they do defensively that Brian Flores does, it kind of allows you to get away with not having the greatest secondary. And then, of course, they really upgraded their offensive line. They signed a couple of offensive linemen in free agency with Will Fries and Ryan Kelly from the Colts, and they drafted Donovan Jackson. So I think that they're going to look different, Mike. I think that they're probably going to be a little more run-heavy, run-centric, short pass, and get J.J. McCarthy's athleticism into the offense more so than Sam Darnold's. So it might not be as downfield as you saw Sam Darnold able to do. But I think that they are well stocked in the trenches to be a very good team. All right, they're on that second level to me. That's that second level of contention.
Yeah, you might have brought up Seattle when we talked before too. As Seattle, do you put them in NFC contender status, or are they more wild card?
Wild card. I mean, I certainly would say their arrow is pointing more up than down. I liked Geno Smith. To be honest with you, I still do. I think he's actually a pretty good quarterback, but they let him go, went with Sam Darnold. That to me only works if you're running a same type of offense, but Clint Kubiak is their offensive coordinator, and he is also of the Shanahan / McVay tree like Kevin O'Connell. So that's a good spot. Cooper Kupp is there. I'm not quite sure how effective he's going to be anymore, but we saw Jackson Smith and Jigba take a really big step up as a number one wideout.
Isn't it funny how fast guys lose it? I saw today Nelson Aguilar retired, and he went back, but it's like, not that, and Nelson wasn't on the same level, but these wide receivers, it feels like they go from 0 to 60 and then right back down to 0, like almost instantaneous. You go from awesome to like insignificant very quickly at that position.
Yes, very much so. And so Seattle is the type of team, I think, that will have some more guys on the way up than the way down. Witherspoon, their corner, is really good. Julian Love has played well since they signed him at safety. Josh Jobe has actually played well for them since the Eagles let him go. They drafted Nick Amadori.
He was a part of like that group of when they had like 5 or 6 guys that were all like this guy and this guy and this guy and this guy. I guess he didn't stick.
No, but I think McDonald's doing the right thing. He's, bringing in guys to fit his system. I like their pick when they drafted Gray Zabel, the offensive lineman. So they're not the type of team that when you stack them up against the Eagles, you can say, well, you got blue chip for blue chip, blue chip for blue chip. Yep. But well coached. And I think that they will look the way the head coach wants that defense to look. And he's a good schemer.
All right. Well, we'll be taking a look at some of the NFC contenders the next couple of weeks here. We have our division previews with Andrew coming up on Thursdays. And, of course, Adam will be on Friday's show. Actually, no, we're off on Friday with the 4th of July here. So it's the last Mosher for this week. We'll have a Mosher Monday mailbag for you right here on the Sports Best. So get your questions in. You can always send them to us, email. You can social media, text board. Mosher's back on Monday for a Mosher Monday mailbag. All right, Jeff Mosher.
Hey.
Don't forget, check him out at phillyvoice.com. What's up?
We're just going to recommend to you before you get out of Urie's, a great spot. Get yourself some crabs and garlic butter, okay? You'll thank me later.
The all-you-can-eat crabs just started, 4 o'clock, but
I'll be there in an hour.
50-cent wings for the Phillies game while we're here. Can't beat that, although the game just ended. But, it's funny. The bar was full. The game ended. Everyone's going to change and clean up for game 2. They'll be back here. So we'll get the crabs at that point. All right, bud?
Yep. Got to be in the garlic butter sauce. You'll thank me later. Take care, bud.